Hello, welcome to this video. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing this now moment with myself and with one another. For those of you who haven't seen these videos before, welcome. Welcome back if you have. My intention is benevolence for all in alignment with the highest levels of love light. So welcome. A lot of things going on. I just posted a video yesterday. I'm just going to trust that I just kind of go into flow here today because I've been wanting to talk about what I drew on this whiteboard quite a few times. And the two videos I did without a microphone, so you couldn't hear me. And then this morning I was trying to get on Zoom and my camera wouldn't work on Zoom. So sometimes I feel like it's just like technology leads me in a certain direction and it's just to go into the flow and not worry about getting slowed down by all of that. So that leads me into some of the synchronicities that we're going to talk about. And what I'm seeing, I'm just going to go right into it. First, I want to draw on synchronicities in general. So if you guys don't know what synchronicities are, they're coincidences that aren't coincidences. Everything is a synchronicity. If you've got something that's showing up as a coincidence in your life, it is a synchronicity. It is something to show you that the universe is communicating with you. And one of the things, so I'm going to talk about a lot of different things today. I might go into a little bit more depth than some of the things I talked about in yesterday's video. I'm not sure, which are a little list right here. Not that you can read my writing. I wrote that really quickly, but bottom line is if you guys have something and everything's connected. So if you think of the universe as a living, breathing thing, right? And we are part of that living, breathing thing, entity, whatever you want to call it, then everything is connected. We are the cells inside of the body of the universe that is inside of the universe, inside of the universe. It's just one way of looking at it. Oftentimes, and our bodies are universes. And so when we have something that's showing up, it can show up in everything. So I'm going to just talk briefly about synchronicities that we are finding in our everyday lives, because what's been coming through a lot in sessions, not all of the time, but sometimes I'll work with a beautiful star seed and they'll say, I don't have any synchronicities showing up. A, or B, they might say, my guides aren't communicating with me. I don't hear my guides. I don't see my guides. My answer to that is different based on what I see with each individual that I work with, but on a collective, if we aren't seeing synchronicities showing up in our lives, it's A, because we're looking too hard and we're tunneling in and we're not expanding our periphery. B, we are expecting them to show up in a certain way. Therefore, when they don't show up in that exact way, we don't see them. And C, perhaps we're ignoring them. So those are the three basic answers that I can give someone who says, and I suggest looking at things that show up for us. And so the other thought about our guides not being there for us, again, are we wanting to only see our guides through our third eye? Are we listening if they're speaking to us? Because sometimes there will be a song playing in our head over and over again. And for the longest time, I would hear songs and I'd be like, where did I hear that? Why is that playing in my head? And then as soon as I started looking up the lyrics of the song, I knew exactly why it was playing in my head. And I recognized it was my guides, AKA me, my higher self, trying to get my attention about something. And I had been ignoring it for years, right? So I share that as a very basic principle to follow is, how is it showing up for me? And not being closed off to how it's showing up for us. The other thing I wanted to share, one of my sisters and I were having a beautiful conversation the other day that we'll probably continue to have. We were talking about the coincidences of, not just the synchronicities. I'm calling them coincidences, and we're morphing that into synchronicities. Of whenever there's an alignment going on, we're getting the symbols and the signals from everything. So what I want to share, I'm trying to figure out how to go into this in a little bit more relatable way. So for example, if something, when we've got even if something isn't in 5D, but it's in a 3D matrix, it is still part of source. So anything can come from any place. You can be watching a television show that is not Love and Light and still get downloads, messages from your higher guides trying to get through to you through that medium, if that makes sense. So, for example, this is completely strange, and the one day that I remember very specifically of being so in flow that I was looking around going, what is happening? Everything was talking to me. My husband turned on the movie Sin City, not a very high vibrational movie. I was in such a daze from everything that I had experienced throughout the day. I just sat down on the sofa. And as I was kind of like, what's happening to me right now? This was he puts on Sin City, and on Sin City kept me in flow. I was seeing the movie show up for me because he chose to turn that movie on in that moment that represented to me what I had just seen or had dreamed about the night before or had had a conversation about. And I believe in part of the movie she has a blue cape on or something. I don't know. And it had to do with this blue ray energy coming through, etc., etc. I'm using this as an example because it comes through in all mediums. So if we're seeing a let's say there's a bunch of movies out. So I'm going to use the Emerald as an example. So not too long ago, we were going through a lot of Emerald activations, downloads, upgrades, whatever you might want to call them, from this Emerald frequency. We could call it an Emerald ray. All right. We could call it an Emerald crystal formation. If you look up the, I believe it's a rhomboid crystal structure. I'm not really sure. But my point is, I had been having all of these synchronicities about emeralds come through. Began with rubies, then it turned into emeralds, and then of course that tied in with the Yellow Brick Road, which ties in with Wizard of Oz. Now we could tie in with the Wizard of Oz now, but at the time when we were going through a particular activation and upgrade as a collective, in this emerald heart frequency, in this crystal lattice work combination that was essentially activating within many, if not all of us, it just so happens that across the board, meaning rippling out or coming in from source, were all of these synchronicities lining up to stimulate that. For example, The Wizard of Oz was on constantly, being replayed. There was a show on television at the time that was about, I'm trying to remember, I had seen several shows that referenced the Yellow Brick Road. I'd seen references to this show I've mentioned before that always lines up synchronistically for me called Expedition Unknown. He had been looking for their lost ruby slippers or something associated with that. And it's like all of these little things come in to wink at us. I have a good friend, one of my best friends since childhood, who says it's God winking at us. So we could just say it, just like when 11:11 shows up for us everywhere. It's 11:11 on the clock. The car in front of us is 11:11. Our bill at the grocery store is $11.11. I could go on and on. Those are synchronicities. They're showing up for us, bringing us into alignment. And if we pay attention to those, they'll continue to show up for us. What do they mean? Well, that's different for everybody. And it's our communication with the universe. The universe communicates to us visually through our senses, our extrasensory abilities. So before, it used to just be seeing something in front of us. The universe can also communicate us through our sense of smell, sound, touch, hearing, so on and so forth. And when we use all of those together in combination, it brings all of this kind of up forward. So for example, my friend and I are going back and forth about dandelions, and lo and behold, she happens to be watching a show where these cartoon characters are flying on a dandelion. I mean, this is how it works. And I'm sharing this with you guys because this is one of the first reasons I started this channel, besides the light language and the messages coming through, was synchronicity. I was guided to share this with everybody as a tool. And many of us are already utilizing it, but what my guides have been telling me is we can utilize it more. We're being asked to step it up and to follow that white rabbit, right? And when I had a session with a beautiful light worker recently, and that was their message, was follow the white rabbit. So they were in it. I call it in flow, like things are happening for them and they are out of the matrix. They are being guided. And as long as they keep following that, other people, they aren't seeing them at all. And we have to go back in and say, okay, what has shown up for it? Break it down and figure out where these might have come from. And then sometimes through conversation, whoever I'm working with goes, there was this time. And then when we start putting the pieces together, it all adds up. So we're being invited to do that. It doesn't matter what stage we're at, utilize that. Okay, so I wasn't planning on going into that synchronicity, but I wanted to talk about that. So the synchronicities, what are we in right now? What movies are out? Even though the movies are coming from a sometimes a 3D perspective, sometimes these directors and actors are plugging into higher source, right? Because we can all have that capability. So while many of the movies out there are honed in on fear, and fear, domination and control, there's a sprinkle of soft disclosure in many of those movies. For example, all of the comic book movies. Most comic book movies have a sprinkling of reality in them, of technology that we are capable of. It didn't just come from the imagination. Where is that imagination? That imagination, that conscious, the giant brain of God, right? We're all connected to it. We are those neurons and pathways, and we are the cells, right? Plugged in to source from one perspective. There's lots of perspectives. But so for right now, there's the dandelion we're seeing. She shared with me these synchronicities about all these shows because she has children. That's a really big one, guys. If your kids are watching a certain show and all of a sudden something pokes out at you, pay attention to it. I had a conversation with a friend of mine when we were going through all these ruby and corundum upgrades, trying to explain to me what was going on in the body, that our body was going from carbon to crystalline, and they were showing me the structures of crystal. I'm literally talking to her, and her daughter hands her a giant diamond. With kids, they play with their giant fake orange corundum. And I was trying to describe the color. And she goes, is it kind of an orange red? And I said, yes. And we were talking about the sacral chakra, which is also associated with that orange red color, right? Root sacral. So it's all like, hello. It's like following the breadcrumbs, right? They're all breadcrumbs to keep us going, to keep us looking, and to keep us going, okay, I'm on the right path, right? And if we're not and nothing is showing up for us, we know that maybe we're in resistance, or we might be in a place of just integrating, this is important, all of the information that we've already been gifted, that we've already been given. Sometimes it's not about looking ahead. For some of us, we've already gathered so much that we can't hold anymore. And rather than dropping things and never having digested them while we're looking for more things to pick up, right? I get that picture of the people picking up shells on the beach and their hands are already full of shells and there's 10 more over here, but they can't collect anymore. They're going to drop them. We need to integrate that, put them in a bag, store them before we collect more. Or the other phase of that is maybe all that needs to just drop, let it go. We are aware of it so that we can move forward. So what stage are you at, right? We're all at different stages. So that's something that's been coming through in general and in sessions. The other thing that was coming through is, and I'm going to go a little bit more, this is our Keep It Simple Star Seeds video. I'm going to end, though, later in the video with some more esoteric things. Not that this isn't esoteric. It's all fun, right? So our idea about the biggest message that was coming through for me is sustainability. So I'm going to go into this a little bit and I'm going to talk about, okay, before I go back into synchronicity, before I leave the subject of synchronicity, I never leave the subject of synchronicity and I never leave the subject of heart, period. It's so important in our growth, in our journey. Those are the key ingredients from one perspective. But I'm going to show a video, and of course I couldn't get on Zoom, so I can't share the screen with you, but I will share this through Instagram. And what I've got here is I drew out this beautiful picture. Now, you may not see the synchronicities when I show this to you, but I, of course, do, and that's what's important. So maybe somebody else, it's like you see a cloud and you go, look, it's an elephant. And somebody looks at it and goes, what are you talking about? I see something totally different. Because from their perspective, that's what's going on. So this alignment of, okay, so breathe. So we don't necessarily need it to be validated, but it is fun when we have that validation sometimes. So I wanted to share that as well. So I'm just going to go into showing you this picture. I had a connection with the beautiful starseed. I was guided to leave this up when I talked to this starseed, and then this was coming into my awareness. So I'm going to put this nice and close so you can see it. And apologies again on that quality. I don't know if that's if you're able to link in. You can check it out in more detail on her Instagram page. And then this is what I drew. So her Instagram page is Remembering Love Light Language, this lovely starseed. And she calls them fire dragon codes. Now, I also communicated with this beautiful starseed. We didn't talk about this beforehand. This starseed showed to me this picture that she had done for them. And I said, that's interesting because this is what I drew last night. And I was guided to not erase it and to tie it in with the work that we're going to do together today. And it was pulling through dragon energies. Now this is going to go a little more esoteric. And I also kind of want to show the layers of synchronicity. So from the Remembering Love Light Language synchronicity, she was pulling through light codes and the fire, which I see as a very masculine frequency, but in this beautiful feminine way without, so I was seeing that. And I was also seeing this embodiment of this divine masculine fire frequency that the starseed was bringing to the table. But what I was seeing was the shape. So if you look at the shape of the dragon, and if I were able to show you this on two screens, you would see it. It looks a lot like what I drew. In addition to that, it was the same colors. I was specifically asked from my guides to draw this in gold, red, and blue. Now, the green, I didn't understand until recently. I didn't draw the green. There were other things that I was guided to draw. Interesting. I'm going to sidebar this just for a moment. This is very synchronistic. So we're having a lot of things going on with the earth, you guys. And in this moment, I'm getting ringing in the ears. My computer just glitched out. There's a lot that just happened. And you guys, this is going to be happening for you too. Sometimes you might feel spacey. Sometimes you might feel like you just lost track of time. You might feel like time slowed way down. For me, it's been speeding up because time isn't what we thought it was. And that's a whole other video, which someday I'll talk about. But I just wanted to share, I'm feeling that as we do this. And that's why sometimes I'll space out in mid-conversation. If you're having trouble putting sentences together, holding a thought process, you guys, there's a shakeup going on, right? We've got all of these frequencies. The earth has been really active. The sun has been really active. As we go through upgrades, the earth is going through upgrades. So back to this. So I was seeing reference on an esoteric level. I'm just going to touch on that briefly. I won't save it till the end. Coincidences and synchronicities. I was getting all of these pictures that I was taking of clouds that look like dragons. Speaking of clouds that look like elephants. I thought, this is weird because I don't usually see dragons in the clouds. I did see them last year, somewhat similar to maybe the same time. And I literally would take a picture and I posted a lot of them on Instagram. I don't know if I posted all of them. That's how many I took. One was Puff the Magic Dragon. Then, as I'm seeing all this dragon activity, and I'm seeing the dragon in meditation, I was guided to wear a dragon bracelet that a friend of mine gave me last year. I mean, it was so powerful. It couldn't be ignored. Then I went on to Instagram, and sure enough, dragon, 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 dragon. I hadn't seen any of that other than in the clouds and in my synchronicities. You guys, it's all meant for a bigger purpose. It's all connected. So what does that mean? Well, there's layers. If we look at it from a super, and that's the other thing. I had seen a dragon's eye open when I was in playtime with one of my beautiful star sisters. Sisters, we had seen this dragon's eye open and it was watching us. And I know that seems weird, but we take this into, we're using our third eye, we're using our intuition, we're using our extrasensory abilities. Just because we don't see it in this matrix doesn't mean it doesn't exist outside of this matrix. Just because we don't see it in our galaxy doesn't mean it doesn't exist in another part of the galaxy. If we don't see the planet, doesn't mean that it's not there. So I'm using this as an example because one of the other big messages that I've been getting is get rid of that self-doubt. If you've got things showing up, we're being asked to stop going like, okay, I must be losing it. Really? Maybe everybody's losing it because what are we losing? We're losing our, get goosebumps. We're losing our sleep. Some of us literally, but literally we're waking up. We're losing a grip on what the old matrix was holding us in. And so it can feel off balance. It can feel wispy and not balanced. It can feel scary at times because it isn't something that we're used to. And I keep referencing that word as past tense. As soon as you get used to something, it's old, right? So the biggest message that's been coming through for at least 6 months now is this is it. It's not going to go back to the way things were. So if we're wishing for things to go back to the way things were, then we're in resistance to change and we're in resistance to fluctuation. And if we're in resistance, we're rigid. And if we're rigid, we can't go with the flow and we can't ride the waves, which means it's going to be a really uncomfortable ride. So why make it more uncomfortable than it needs to be? So that's just a little message that's coming through as well. So these synchronicities in movies, for example, we had a lot of dragon energies. Now we can look at the dragon. I'm not going to go into all of it. There's more light workers out there that explain the energy better than I do. My purpose is to generally connect people with their energies on these other dimensional aspects, or connect people with their other dimensional aspects a little easier sometimes, or to share with them what those aspects are that are lining up with them right now. But I don't go into exactly what that realm is all about. There's a lot of light workers that do that. So if you really feel drawn to the dragon energies, spend a little time and look the research up. And that leads me into anything. If you feel really drawn to ancient Egypt, start looking into it more. because that energy is wanting to come through to be remembered or to be integrated or to be expressed. And it might be something that you feel like it's waking up within you. That doesn't mean that it's the end all be all. Sometimes I'll recognize a timeline, and that's kind of where I'm going with this as well. I know I'm kind of all over the place. And I'll have a memory pop up of, let's say, an ex friend, and they're in my awareness. So in that moment, I ask, it could be that they're thinking about me, and that's why I'm thinking about that, right? It could be that I'm collapsing an old timeline that they were a part of, and that timeline is closing out. It's already run its course and just kind of disappears from one perspective. This is a very multi-dimensional perspective, guys. It's not, this is the only way to think about it. I'm just sharing with you how I look at these things. And then in that moment, I ask to clear that frequency. I clear that energy. I'll do a little light, a little love, whatever needs be done in that moment. And then if I feel the need to investigate it a little further, I will. But it isn't necessarily going Nancy Drew and being like, well, what does this mean? Well, why is this person thinking about me? Did I do, well, that's, especially with people, if it's something like ancient Egypt and I'm getting like pyramid this and raw that and gold, I might be a little bit more inclined to do a little bit more research because it's fun. But if it's just about somebody that was a part of my past, why get locked into that? That's it's not necessary. So again, it's letting go of that need to know sometimes and just trusting that something is happening. And if that person is meant to show up for me, they will. And if I'm just closing at a timeline, poof, let it go. Don't anchor it and pull it through and then wonder in the future, well, why did this person keep showing up in my life? Because you're hanging on to them, or you're obsessing over it, or you're living in the past, whatever it might be. That's something else that's been coming up a lot. Oh my goodness, so much. So back to the dragon. So this dragon energy is coming through. The easiest way, without me going into too much detail, is there's been things that have happened in our past and we have connections to it. Some of you may not feel any linkage to dragons at all and they might just creep you out, and that's fine. This can also be a reference to a certain group of ley lines within the earth. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So you may not have anything to do with that dragon energy, but perhaps you have some connections to the earth frequencies, and it might be that those ley lines are going through some sort of reactivation or some sort of healing or alignment, which has been happening. From my perspective, I see that everything has changed. Everything's been shifting for years now. It's not something new, but we just had some major shift in the dragon ley lines in the earth. And you can Google that and look it up. And I say Google, look it up, whatever search engine you wish to use. That whole Google stuff is another can of worms, which we won't get into right now. It doesn't matter, you guys. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about that. We'll see. So if you look it up, you can see the areas. If you look up dragon ley lines, they'll show you different areas, general areas where these dragon ley lines are located. And again, if I had this on Zoom, I would pause it, take you through a little bit of that, but I don't. And so you can play with it on your own. Again, follow the rabbit trail if you're guided to, and if you're not, but don't get sucked into, and this is what my guides keep saying, don't get sucked into it. If you're having fun with it, great. But if it's making you feel anxious or you're going, well, what does this mean? Well, does this mean that that area of the world is going to have an earthquake? It doesn't matter. It doesn't. In the bigger scheme of things. I'm not saying it doesn't matter that group might be affected by a potential earthquake because these lines are all shifting. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think you can understand from a higher perspective, it's about us sustaining our frequency. And I'm going to get to that in a more detail because that keeps coming up. I talked about it a little bit yesterday. So these energies shifted, the dragon energies, something happened that we were able to awaken within us, our DNA lineages associated with dragon frequencies. And if there's those out there that don't believe that exists, that's fine. That doesn't matter. It's like saying our lizard brain, right? We know we have this lizard brain. We know we have reptilian and mammalian. If I'm saying that right, right? We're mammals, we're reptilian. We have these different parts of the brain. So from a higher perspective, what if we had a little dragon flavor too? You know, what if we had these other things that our science hasn't been able to explain yet? AKA junk DNA, AKA dark matter. Like all of this stuff is just kind of put off to the side because they don't know what it is. So therefore it doesn't matter. It does actually, and they just don't have the wherewithal, the knowledge, the knowingness to learn about that. And in essence, we haven't sustained a high enough frequency or vibration in order to allow that knowledge to come forward as a collective. This is another, I'm pulling in all these layers. So if hopefully you can follow where I'm going with this. So now we as a collective group of light workers who perhaps have raised our frequency and we hold, for example, that dragon frequency, or we've extended out our welcome of forgiveness and love and light to that timeline where that dragon energy exists or was dominant, and that has allowed them to heal pieces of that timeline to now to be able to bring forward that dragon energy that was perhaps blocked or shut down or in what was the word, sleep mode, I guess. So that's coming online for a lot of us, and it's assisting us in healing. Not that that's the right word, it isn't necessarily, but some of those lineages that are associated with some perhaps timelines that weren't necessarily created in the highest and greatest good for all, right? And so many of us are feeling that connection because we were or are or will be, past, present, future doesn't exist, everything is now, we're connected to that lineage. Or we are, let's say our BFF was a dragon at one time and we were Pleiadian. I'm just using that as an example. And now we're feeling that universal echo, those waves, we're feeling those ripples. And we're able to do that because we came here to assist in embodying those energies so that they could be healed in addition with Earth. And so that things could be, I'm being guided to say wrongs are righted, but that isn't even it. That's a play on words. Like wrong turns were made. So now we're kind of turning the wheel back in the other direction so that certain things that were destabilized could be stabilized, or certain things that were usurped could be given back the power. So I could go into so many different layers, but that's just a really basic idea of why we've been feeling this all of a sudden. Game of Thrones for the last, 7 seasons, that's been building up. It's a representation, and it pulls us in with many different remembrances. Dothraki, it's not a coincidence that they have their own language that many of us are like, wow, it feels like I know what that language is. Where do you think these languages come from? I'm getting goosebumps. A friend of mine and I were just talking about this yesterday. She's like, isn't that weird that Dothraki sounds so much like light language? Sure is. You know, or back in the Star Trek days, you guys were pulling from this collective, and it's like, it's a coincidence that dragons and unicorns, and I'll get to that in just a moment because I just shared this with a friend the other day. Oh, and also the Battle of the Lands. So the whole story of Game of Thrones and how many people were enthralled by it, it was very symbolic of layers of reality that was being played out in our biggest form of connection and communication in 3D, which is the television, right? That's one example. And much of that was actually quite activating, even though much of it was also pulled in with some darkness and some things that you didn't necessarily, a lot of fear and a lot of violence and a lot of anger. But if you're in a high enough vibration, that stuff's not going to affect you. Not that I'm encouraging that people watch those types of shows, but I'm sharing that even that can activate certain people. Now, granted, on the flip side, if somebody's already in a major state of fear, it can further that energy as well. And that's just something to understand. So I had seen, how many of you guys had noticed all of the, maybe it was a year ago, it was like all of a sudden everything was unicorns and everything was purple and everything was glitter and donuts, right? I think I showed you guys a can. I had this water bottle I bought. And on the water bottle were diamonds, unicorns, rainbows, and donuts with sprinkles. So I share that because all of that simultaneously was being activated. Our pineal was going through some upgrades. We were receiving a lot of diamond frequency activations. We were getting these diamond plasma frequencies, crystals in the earth that are like diamonds were being activated. The rainbow frequency, our chakras were going through an upgrade to where they were all essentially becoming more of a rainbow than just individual colors existing in separate spaces from one another. I don't remember how long ago this was, maybe a year ago. So it wasn't a coincidence that if I went to the store, everything was that. So it's a trend. And in one way, it's not, we could look at it as not necessarily a good thing because we're looking outside of us and we're happy with unicorns on our paper and our stapler and all of this physical stuff. But it's fun to then say, we must be, as a collective, wanting this. This is where we're at as a collective. And then everything was those geometric shapes. Everything you look at, the light fixtures, they're all these sacred geometry. You guys, those are activations that when people in a creative, plugged in alignment with the universe, they get it and the artists draw it out and they say, I'm going to put out a line and everything on it's going to be diamonds. How about all of the water bottles now that have crystals in them? Mind you, 2 years ago, just 2 years ago, I went to the emergency room. No, it was 3 years ago now, having some major ascension symptoms. Big time. I was going through a huge detox. I couldn't explain what was going on. The doctors couldn't explain what was going on. And I kid you not, the emergency room doctor said, because my husband jokingly said, well, he was talking about their kids and yoga teachers. There was this whole conversation. And my husband goes, well, my wife's been putting crystals in her water. And the doctor was laughing, saying those yoga teachers, and they were jokingly saying that was probably what was making me sick. Now you go to TJ Maxx, you go online, and they have all kinds of water bottles that have crystals in them to enhance their water. But just 3 years ago, that was seen as crazy. Like, I was literally like, am I in the Twilight Zone right now? I was in Bizarro World. So I laugh because that's something else we'll get to in just a moment. A lot of you guys might be seeing, how many of you have planted seeds about information and the person wasn't ready to hear it? Then all of a sudden the person comes back into your awareness and they are totally on that path and they forgot that you even sprinkled those seeds. That's okay. We don't have the ego. We don't care. It's just funny sometimes to see it, and it's exciting too, because then you recognize those seeds stuck. Or perhaps it was the fact that they had maybe some suggestions from us and all of these other things activated, seeing the crystals, seeing the diamonds, trigger, 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 unicorn, pineal, so on and so forth. All right, back to the dragons. So we've had this dragon energy that's been in our mainstream for 7 years now, approximately, maybe. I don't know if that's the right number. Maybe it's 8. Well, they've always been in our awareness, right? From a long time ago, we've always had this fascination with them, but it's been very strong recently. And what I see, and I've seen in a session, is this has to do with the elementals. Well, I did not intend for this video to be this long, so I'm going to try to keep it in an hour. So under an hour. So the elemental kingdom is very much tied in somehow with this dragon energy. And I'll come back to this in just a moment. So what I have been seeing is there are those of us that are assisting the elementals in coming out of their hiding, so to speak. And I don't understand it all. I haven't gone into a deeper meditation about it from a 3rd dimensional or 4th dimensional perspective. But from a multi-dimensional perspective, what I see, not only in dream time, in dream work, but also in session work with other light workers who are holding this dragon frequency or holding space for the elementals. I've also seen it with other star brothers and sisters who have this fairy-like energy that they're connected with. All of a sudden, it's like they're coming out of hiding. They're literally peeking their heads out and saying, is it safe for us to come out? Because something was happening with this elemental frequency to where some sort of timeline that these elementals were connected with, they weren't safe. Ironically, just on Amazon Prime, there is a new television show with Orlando Bloom, something about carnival or about the fairy realm and this war. And I just see it as so synchronistic to what I've been seeing in session work. So again, everything is connected. And usually if there's something that's coming out, there can be something pulled in from that is synchronistic to show, yeah, this is what's going on. But I also want to share that what we focus on will bring more of it to us. So again, we are being guided after all of this. That was my little update on elementals. So I will possibly do a video on assisting the elemental kingdom, honing in on that dragon energy with the highest levels of love, light, and oneness in benevolence for all. That's the key in all of this. Because if it isn't unity consciousness and it's something that this energy is better than that energy, then it isn't in alignment with where we're headed. And it isn't something that we want to play with. So the more we send our attention to something, the more it's going to come into our life, which, as we all know from the law of attraction. But if we constantly are being reminded of the shadow, the shadow, the shadow, it's not that I'm suggesting or that the guides are saying ignore the shadow. That's not the case. Most of us, especially if you're watching this video, generally speaking, have done the work. And if we haven't done the work, it's going to continuously show up for us because it is something that wants us to look at it. See me. I used to hear that all the time when I first started doing healing work. I would see these energies and they'd say, see me. And I'd go, okay, I see you. But if we continue to play with this energy and pull it in and its shadow, it wants to stay here. It doesn't want to go because, well, there's a lot of that I could go, but I don't want to get into that. Bottom line is, do we want to play in the shadow and stay there? Or do we want to play in the light and be able to see the shadow? So it's not that we don't see it. We honor. We love what it shows us because it is yin and yang, push and pull, right? It is that balance. However, if there's something that keeps coming up that is a very dark energy, we are being invited to not continue to play there anymore. If that's your flavor, then great. But that isn't the flavor of oneness and unity. If we are continuing to look at something being bad or something being good, it just is. We see it, we acknowledge it, and we ask, what does it have to teach us? And if we can't If we're not learning from it, it will continue to show up for us. It isn't just about lessons though, from what they've been showing me. It's about digestion, and it's about digesting that shadow energy so that we can utilize it as fuel. And then whatever isn't able to be utilized as fuel, let it go. So an example would be a relationship. We keep having somebody show up in our life who is, we'll say, emotionally abusive. They talk down to you, they don't make you feel good, and that keeps coming up. Well, of course, that shadow aspect of us is that we're not worthy for somebody to treat us in a loving way. So our shadow aspect is unworthiness. So we pull in more beings that show us how unworthy of love we are. And that person is also equally unworthy of love. They have to take it and make you feel bad to make themselves feel better, to feed their shadow. You see where I'm going with this? So we're either feeding the shadow or we're digesting it and saying, you know what? Thank you for showing me that I am worthy, and you're not part of the timeline that I want to be on. You aren't part of this higher vibrational energy. You aren't part of the dimension I wish to exist from. You are part of that density that is essentially keeping me anchored to a lower timeline, a lower dimension, or a heavier frequency that isn't allowing me to expand and connect with more of what I really am. Thank you for showing me what I am not. And then that's digesting, that's integrating, that is transmuting it from one thing and alchemizing it, which is the stage that we're in, right? This alchemy. You were leaded down with lead weight, and now we've morphed it into this shiny and liquid gold. And you're able to take what you need from it and let go of the rest, and it can go away and be a shadow someplace else, but not for me, right? That's what we're being guided to. That's where we're at. Okay, so the elementals in those kingdoms, they represent this communion and this oneness with everything. Air. If you think of the elementals, not just the fairy kingdom, or of course the dragon kingdom and the ley lines and all of this, we can think of just water, right? What are elements, right? The metals, the fire, water, air, ether, earth, and all of those things. So what's happening is we're starting to recognize that we are all of those things, right? And the biggest message that's been coming through from my higher guidance team regarding that is 0 point. Now I'm going to do this on a completely separate video and get more into the heart of the matter. But back to this drawing. So if I look at this as a dragon, right? The frequency that they were showing me is gold coming up. So we're alchemizing all of this rainbow golden frequency, right? We're also harmonizing with a golden bandwidth or ray color spectrum. But that is a representation of, what does gold represent? So again, it's layers. Those of us that embody the gold ray are activating that within ourselves, activating it within others from one perspective. Another perspective is that we are alchemizing the 3D old frequencies, and we're changing them from lead to gold. We could also look at that before it was a lot more crystal. So we were going from carbon to crystalline, right? Now it's more of the elements, right? Not that the crystals aren't elements, which they are, but you see where I'm going with this, perhaps? In addition to that, gold is a reference to our value system. And it also is a reference to time, because what do most of us spend our time doing? We are going to work to bring money, which is part of our old value system, into our lives. And that's all shifting. Our idea and concept of what is important is shifting. It's changing. It's all going through an upgrade, so to speak. And so I'm going to go into this maybe a lot more, but what came through in this particular drawing was we're going through transit, we're going through a transition, a trans-ion. I was also hearing flip it and reverse it. So my star sister Candace and I were going through lots of flip it, Missy Elliott references. And I laugh because that's another example of synchronicity. I keep hearing this song, and she was hearing it, and I was hearing it too. What are the chances? It's not like this is an old song, flip it, reverse it. So I was seeing this as reference to the magnetics, reference to our Merkabas. I was seeing it in reference to time. I kept hearing hickory dickory dock, right? And when I looked it up, it's a nonsense poem. So we've had this rhyme that no longer makes sense, but it's not according to our senses. Our senses are expanding out. And so that's why everything just doesn't make sense right now. It's all in this, we're in a convergence. And I'll get to that in a minute. So I was seeing this reference to mouse, tree, which I'll get into maybe in another video and go into more depth on that. But chiming at the relevant point in the poem. So if we think of a poem, right, it's got rhythm, it's got timing, and it means other things. It's multi-layered. It's reading between the lines. If you read Rumi, for example, the great poet, or if you read Shakespeare, it's not exactly what they write. It's how it's written. It's the pose. It's the style. It's the type of wording. It's the flow. And that's what we're shifting into with our new concept of time. In addition to the mathematics that were in the old system, once these new discoveries become mainstream, we're going to have to change all of it. And that will be an interesting transition. I was also seeing TikTok. So it's how we communicate. It's changing our communication with not only one another, it's also changing how we communicate with our bodies. We are expanding our telepathic abilities. More and more of us are seeing that we are having deja vus. We're finishing each other's sentences. We're talking about something and then it's showing up for us on television or on the radio. That is not only telepathy, it's also timeline convergences. It's also synchronicity. It's just a universal shift that is allowing us to magnetize to us more of what we are vibrating at. Okay, I've got about 8 more minutes to keep this at 60 minutes. All right. So if we look at convergence, what I was seeing was all of these coils, right? And they were showing me this one, starting off with this coil, and they were showing it like all these coils converging. And what they were showing me is this is 0 point, this spiral, this spin, which has this like purple energy to it. But this spiral holds all of the colors that are converging. So it's holding, I might decide to do this in another video. So I'm going to do that because I have a feeling this is going to go really lengthy. So let me go back and just go into the flip it and reverse it. So it's a little bit like Alice in Wonderland. What's right side up is upside down. So really, or thinking of how we perceive our perception in our eyes, and how the cones in our eyes reverse and actually flip things. And if we were we're really seeing things backwards, I think, or there's a lot going on with the cones and the eye perception as well. And that's a different video. So I was seeing this reference to fluctuations, changes in our atoms, changes in the atoms and the electricity in the air. Our changes in travel, and I was getting reference to time travel, as well as the magnetic shift of the poles. But that is not even exactly, it's like beyond that. It's like, which I'll go into in my next video. So I'm going to end on this note because that was a lot of information, I think. I'm going to talk more about the poem. I'm going to talk more about sustainability, as well as this convergence and timeline collapse, I guess. So in love and light, you guys, thank you so much for tuning in and sharing this now moment with myself and with one another. And again, I'm trying to catch up. I have emails to respond to, I have questions to respond to. I have a lot going on in the next couple of weeks. I will be changing my schedule accordingly. So I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting anything. You guys are more than welcome to check out the Instagram, Keep It Simple Starseeds, at Keep It Simple Starseeds. I follow quite a lot of light workers. And when I talk about synchronicity, Instagram is one of my favorite ways to see it all play out, because it's like you can't ignore it. If I have a dream about the fairies, and then the next day 20 people post about the fairies, I know something's going on in the collective, and it's kind of fun to play with that. And then when we reach out and branch out, you know, this person who shared with me their painting of the dragon, they're connecting with this other light worker who I happen to follow on Instagram, right? Neither one of us know each other, but we both follow each other's work, and it just so turns out that he connected with both of us. And we were seeing different things, but in different ways, but they were actually the same thing. And she activated certain things for this particular light worker, and then I shouldn't say I or she, our higher guidance team all got together and essentially allows us to converge and work together in unity and oneness. Unity. Okay, in love and light, guys, thank you so much. Namaste.